I'd like to introduce Pepper Adams and Donald Byrd, two excellent musicians of the modern field. Gentlemen, welcome this way. Nice to have you here. Donald?
It's nice being here.
Pepper Adams?
Good seeing you, Leigh.
I wonder if you fellas would submit to some fast, key words, and I'd like to get your reaction. We'll go right down the list of words, and then, Donald, you take the first answer, and Pepper, if you're influenced by him, that's quite all right. We might start at something like this. If I mention to you jazz critics, Donald Byrd, what do you say?
And keep it clean.
Over in the corner, Donald Byrd.
Oh, well, I think I'll pass this one. Let Mr. Adams go.
Pepper, speak.
Well, now, it's getting so... Actually, jazz critics are not as harmful anymore as they used to be. Because there are so many more of them, they're spending much of their time now fighting among themselves, criticizing each other's criticism, and leaving the musician more free to go on with his creative work.
You're sure, Donald, you haven't anything to add to that?
Very good.
Touche. All right, the critics in that corner, Donald Byrd and Pepper Adams over there. And no apologies to Martin Williams, Nat Hentoff, Leonard Feather, and Ralph Gleason and the rest. Now for another key thought around here. I might mention recording studios. Donald Byrd, any ultimates or something that's just passé?
No. A recording studio, you can't really label it or make a generality out of the whole thing.
I imagine it takes the artist who's on one side of the microphone and the engineer and the producer on the other side.
Yes, and then again, the artists, like now, after the years I've been recording, the few years at least, I'm beginning to know what I want out of a record and the sound that I would like to get. So it's a coordination or the cooperation between the two of us, the engineer and myself.
How about you, Pepper Adams? I mentioned recording studios, and what's the reaction?
Well, they vary, of course, in quality. I think one of the best I've recorded in has been Radio Sound. Is that the name of it, in Hollywood? Yeah, I think they've done some very good work. One thing, especially since the advent of the stereo recording, many engineers will insist upon dividing the band so as to get a good, clear stereo balance. And it's true that this sounds fine in stereo, except that a band divided against itself cannot stand.
To quote an old saw or two. Well, that takes care of the subject of recording studios. How about something that we mentioned in one of our conversations in the dim, dark past, Donald? Something about hunger drive.
Oh, yes.
In relation to music.
Oh, yes. That sort of puts the finishing touches, at least, to the rough edges. And when a person arrives in New York, he's full of ideas, and he's going to set the world on fire. At least I thought I was. And even in my playing, it becomes more polished by hearing trumpet players that have been playing for years. And this seeing such a broad cross-section begins to broaden my outlook as far as playing the instrument and music in general.
In just a little different way, Pepper Adams, what does tradition mean to you? That is, tradition related to the music you play, jazz.
I believe it means a good deal. I often think of the musician coming up now that has never had the experience of hearing, say, Lunsford's band in person. All the things that they're missing. It's like trying to write in the English language without having any knowledge of Shakespeare, which would be mighty difficult because so many things come from sayings and so forth.
And the tradition of swinging on C and jazznocracy and all this relates to jazz and the contemporary idea of swing.
Oh, yes, certainly. I think that any jazz musician or jazz follower who is completely unaware of anything previous to 1950 is missing an awful lot. And he's not only missing the things that happened at that time, but he's missing the relationship of what is happening today with what happened then.
You're stepping on my toes now.
Donald, I think you should speak up then if your toes have been stepped on.
Oh, well, it's like he said, it is true. You should know what has gone before, because it's just like studying history and anything. And I think it's very important. It's one of the things that I'm very sorry that I didn't get a chance to hear more than I did. Like, for instance, I only heard Clifford Brown play twice, and I heard quite a bit of Dizzy, but I didn't hear Miles until 1954. And trumpet players like Fats Navarro I never heard, and Freddie Webster I never heard. And then there were some that I did hear, but I wasn't fully aware of them at the time. Like, for instance, I heard Billy Eckstine's band, but I didn't know that Gene Ammons nor Art Blakey, someone that I would play with years later, was even in the band. I was just impressed by Billy Eckstine singing Hello Baby and playing trombone at the time, you know. So I missed quite a bit myself. And I think that it is very important, like Pepper said.
And so we refer to tradition as relates to the jazz player. Incidentally, Donald Byrd on trumpet, Pepper Adams on baritone. Actually, they've set them aside for the moment, submitting to some fast keyword thoughts about the music they play. If I ask you what the blues mean, Pepper Adams, what do you say?
Well, the blues are a deep-rooted tradition, of course, and there are many different types of blues. We think of now blues as being a 12-bar form, which it isn't necessarily. There's an old 8-bar blues form, which I believe predates the 12-bar form. And then, of course, there are all the different variations that were in the past and are now being developed more. Actually, if a young musician were to come to me and ask me to show him the chords to the blues, I wouldn't know where to begin. The chords to which blues? There are hundreds of them within a 12-bar form. It's a fascinating and almost inexhaustible field.
Donald Byrd, in your tradition and background, what do you think of when I mention the blues?
Well, to me, that's the basis of all jazz. That's if you don't have an understanding, we'll say, not necessarily the ability to play, because you can run across the notes, but it's an understanding of it. And unless you have this basic understanding, then there's nothing.
So much for the blues, and each to his own personal feeling concerning them. Something that's contemporary. Today, modern art is, of course, a great force in our life, and it has its impact on music. Gunther Schuller stands for the translation, I guess, and the bridge between classical and jazz, and there comes to mind the name Ornette Coleman. You playing the reeds, Pepper Adams. What's your reaction to some of the ideas and concepts of Ornette Coleman?
Well, I find a lot of interesting things in what Ornette plays. I had an interesting discussion with the tenor saxophonist Billy Mitchell one night after we had both listened to Ornette, and we were impressed by some things in his style and very unimpressed by others. One thing which almost depressed us was the fact that there is practically no harmonic basis. You have the continual melodic flow without a strong harmonic underbass, which makes it, after a while, begin to sound like Oriental music, the Indian ragas and so forth. And then we got to discussing what Ornette's style was, and we finally decided we have no basis to judge it on. It might be an excellent style which is being played poorly.
Thank you very much, Pepper, for a forthright answer on that. And Donald Byrd, what's your reaction to the subject of Ornette Coleman, who is controversial in this present day?
Well, I've heard him play, and I've been very impressed by some of the things that he's done, and then, as Pepper says, I've been petrified or horrified by the others. And the harmonic structure is the thing that's kind of got me sort of befuddled. But from the bit of studying of harmony and theory and so forth that I've had, which I doesn't mean really too much, because it's like a standard form that everybody's using. But I think that in playing, that if everyone thinks together, then there is some type of harmony or something like that underlying the melody. But if not, it's chaotic. But I'll have to listen to them again. I think I'll pass on this one too.
Well, from what I can judge from what you've said, Donald, that perhaps Ornette Coleman might, and I don't know whether you inferred this or not, does he represent chaos or anarchy in jazz?
No, not necessarily, because jazz is to a degree supposed to be spontaneous combustion. That's one thing, and but then again, I feel that a person, when he reaches the point that Ornette is striving for, should have played quite a bit of music and should have covered quite a bit. I think he should be a master of his instrument at that time. Now this, I don't know. I don't get the feeling that Ornette is yet the master, although I feel that what he is doing is definitely food for thought, and is something to look forward to and to experiment with and so forth. But I think you have to work together, and a man trying to play something like that and creating a form is like what would you call it? A kaleidoscope, when you shake it up and it presents a picture, but every time it presents a definite pattern or something like that.
But always a different one.
Yeah, but always a different one. Well, you have to be together. That would take years of perfecting a thing like that, because you must begin to think as one. And then it's like a trial and error method. You may make it, and then again you may not. You may hit here, you may hit there, and then you may lose out. So I don't know. I'd have to think about that one for a while, I believe.
Pepper, how do you feel about that in regard to what Donald had to say about that evaluation of Ornette Coleman? Whether or not he represented chaos, anarchy, although he uses a form. He does use form, doesn't he, in the creation of his music?
Well, in my talking to him, he said that it's, and talking to George Russell the other day, they both said that it's not the form. They say that everything that you play is right, which is true, because you're only expressing an emotion at the time. But within this free form and this whatever you may call it, this freedom that they have, there's still got to be some type of unity, regardless to how remote it may be. Because if not, then how can you define the difference between chaos and order?
Pepper?
Well, I would say this, that you say that George Russell has said that everything that you play in a situation like that is right. Well, it would be bound to be right if...
well, not in that particular situation, in any situation. It's like, as he expressed to me, it's like a philosophy, which I am inclined to go along with. It's just as, you should have as much freedom, as you probably know, in playing as you do in speaking. But there must be that unity of words to present an idea, I guess, and how far you can go with this thing is something else. I think it's like in speaking. In speaking with jazz musicians, you may say one word that somebody else who's not aware of this particular meaning, there's about 10 different meanings. Sometimes I even lose track of the thought with another jazz musician. He may say something is like, we'll say the term bad.
Mm-hmm.
Now that can mean good, but the only way I can really tell is by the inflection in his voice, you see. But you can go so far out with this that you can even lose the person.
All sense of relationship
Yeah.
to people.
Yeah, you can lose it. You can lose the complete thought.
Then you're saying that music should relate to people.
It
And-
should be so that it is still within contact of the people. That's what I'll say.
Pepper?
Well, I believe this definitely, in that the lack of a consistent harmonic structure will robs music of its expressive capacities, as in, say, the Hindemith theories of tension, which are commonly practiced, perhaps unknowingly, by jazz musicians. In the tension of playing the 9th on top of a minor 7th chord, the increased tension of playing the 11th on top of the chord, which, if the chord isn't there, you can play in 9ths and 11ths all day and you won't have any more tension than you would have if you were playing the minor 3rd.
I think that what should be done, though, is that maybe as time goes by, more understanding of the man's basic philosophy of his music, because without that, there is nothing, you see. And it's like the same thing with Stravinsky. The first time they heard him, I believe, in Paris, in the Rite of Spring. Like, they started to rioting and started to fighting, and they never even finished the composition. But through the years, his philosophy has been brought forth, and now it's an accepted thing. But I think with all innovators, the philosophy, the same thing with Dizzy and Charlie Parker. Dizzy said he wouldn't make any comment at the time because it brought back too many memories, you know. They understood what they were doing at the time, but the philosophy at that time was such that the other musicians didn't know what was going on, because they were criticized by quite a few people.
Yeah, certainly. You aren't old enough to remember when all that was going on, but I certainly do. I was already playing when the big controversy started breaking out, and
This was the controversy concerning the transition of jazz into a modern state, is that right?
well,
Some people had been playing it. It was just whether or not the bulk of the other musicians were going to come in or either stick to their side. You see, that was more or less, I guess, because there was quite a number that went along with it. Because even some of the older people like Coleman Hawkins employed at that time an all bebop band, and he wasn't in that school at all.
I believe the time of crisis came when the word bebop had been coined as a commercial term, and then it was no longer a case of, well, do you like the way Clyde Hart plays piano, or do you like the way that Monk plays, or Charlie Parker? It's, do you like bebop or don't you? It was a dividing
A pro
line.
and a con.
Sort of like the controversy about 7 years ago when the term West Coast jazz was coined as a commercial term. Before it had just been, well, who do you like that plays? Now it was all of a sudden, what do you think of the West Coast school? Which, of course, never did exist except in the mind of some liner note writer.
Well, then again, a lot of those who lived out on the West Coast who really believed who read their write-ups or something like that.
Afraid so. Yeah, a little ironic truth in that.
The hard bop and the cool school and was it East Coast, West Coast, No Coast jazz?
Well,
And
if you're
North
going to package
Coast.
it, you got to label it.
Well, this conversation is a result of mentioning the name Ornette Coleman, and of course has brought up the idea of innovators, order, chaos, and new and furthering movements in the world of the art of jazz. Donald Byrd, excellent modern jazz trumpet player, Pepper Adams, skilled artist of baritone and various instruments of the reeds, are submitting to questions and some key words. And this is not a jazz psychoanalysis, gentlemen, but we might consider it just, a kind of inspiration and guide and furthering education of disc jockeys and listeners. If I bring up the subject of, say, liner notes on long play records. Pepper Adams, you might have something to record here. Reactions, and you're the musician who plays, and then someone who does not play is called in to line up a summary of what was contained in that long play record.
Well, there are all different styles of liner notes. I think, from the sophomoric kind of "this is the greatest" to the infinitely detailed list of solos with practically list the chords to the tunes. The album we were looking at in your office earlier struck me as rather humorous. The notes were so involved and so detailed that it was almost impossible to extract any facts from them. It's quite possible to write in circles for quite a long time without ever getting anywhere. The favorite phrase that I just coined, the use of erudition to conceal lack of knowledge.
Liner notes today. Donald Byrd, any reaction to liner notes on the back of long play records?
I have nothing to say. I'm using the Fifth Amendment.
Donald Byrd, trumpet player, Pepper Adams, baritone saxophonist, a team together in a fine modern jazz group. If one were to look at newspapers today, they might see a little headline saying, "Stratford, Jazz Riot." What do you think causes jazz festivals and riots? Donald Byrd?
Communists in spite.
Pepper Adams?
Well, I had a theory about the riots at Newport. I always figured it didn't have much to do with the jazz festival there. I remember reading that President Eisenhower was due to visit Newport a week later. I thought it was the natives rioting in the manner in which the Tokyo students did.
When two jazzmen team together in the same unit and they get somewhat equal billing, you wonder what's in their mind and what sort of ideas they have in creating a unit or musical organization which plays jazz. Donald Byrd, what's the mission of your group?
Well, at the present time, for us to get out of the hole, right? The financial rut we've been in. That's our main achievement. That's first order of the business. And secondly, well, no, really, firstly, is to try to play something or to create. And like I said, secondly, is financially get out of the hole.
Pepper, we find you in the group, and you've been in such large organizations as the Kenton Band. Lucky Thompson had a big band, and I think Woody Herman and the extension of the Third Herd were booming along with the low register of your baritone. Is there a thrill in a small combo? I'm sure there is.
Oh, of course there is. The only reason I'm in this doggone business is because I enjoy playing my instrument. And it is a form of creative self-expression, and my ideal is to work as much as possible with a group in which I can stretch out in the way I want to, and this group is perfect for me. I wouldn't leave it for anything.
Well, if you had an alternative and you weren't practicing in music, what else would you do?
Dodge me.
Yeah, I did work the old Dodge place one time. I was a stock handler at the old Briggs place, too. But,
These two gentlemen talking in front of the microphone are natives of Detroit, Michigan. And actually, did you start playing in Detroit together?
No, I'm several years older than Donald.
It sounded that way in relating to, say, such exciting bands as Jimmy Lunsford, Swingin' on C, or the thundering sound of that brass and reed section coming off at exactly 8:30 with the downbeat and Jimmy Lunsford out in front, as if your history extends to swing.
That was funny, this real wonderful swinging band, and Lunsford up in front of him with a little baton.
And that was the last touch of, I think, a high school and college university type instructor at work. Donald Byrd and Pepper Adams, who do you think are some of the leading forces in music today? Let's start with soloists. That may be an unfair question, but just let's leave out somebody, we'll have to. But Don, you mentioned some of the soloists who seem to be leading forces today in modern jazz.
Well, of course, I follow very closely trumpet players, and of course there's the two kings of trumpet, there's Louis Armstrong and there's Dizzy Gillespie. And there's, of course, Charlie Shavers and Roy Eldridge. And getting down to the younger ones, there's still Kenny Durham and Joe Gordon and Thad Jones.
Well, I won't press you much more, except to say there probably is one name unfulfilled, simply because his career was cut short.
Oh, well, of course, yeah, Clifford Brown.
And by the same token, Pepper, would you care to mention historically some of the soloists who have contributed so much to music today?
Well, there are a few of the older names I'd like to mention just for the benefit of perhaps some of the younger musicians that might be interested in looking up some records that they've been on. One of particular interest might be the trombonist Jimmy Harrison, who appeared on some of the early Fletcher Henderson records and some early Coleman Hawkins sides, who had an approach to swing which was truly remarkable for at that time, when the dotted 8th, 16th approach to playing a series of eighth notes was certainly the standard, when this fellow was one that had a wholly different approach, which I think opened up the modern trombone school. It's been said often that Jack Teagarden stems quite a bit from Jimmy Harrison. I don't know whether there's any truth in that or not, but I know that a whole lot of players at that time got an idea of swing approach from Harrison's playing. Another soloist I would definitely recommend looking up is Jimmy Blanton, particularly the 6 sides of duo records that Blanton and Duke Ellington made together. Not just as an example of excellent playing of the bass as an instrument, but this fellow was a remarkable soloist with a strong sense of construction and beautiful melodic sense.
Speaking of bass players, we were talking earlier today about, we were mentioning to our bassist about Israel Crosby's playing in relationship to the time, and even in relationship to some of the bass players that were playing with Charlie Parker at that particular time. And was that 39?
Yeah, well, those records that you said Al Lyon played those quartet records for you?
Yes.
Gee,
and you'd be surprised, without even a drum, it was really amazing it's amazing to hear Israel play with Ahmed Jamal now. But to think that he was playing that way in 39 and everybody else was playing an old style in comparison to what he was doing.
And Israel Crosby's famous record of blues and C-sharp minor with Teddy Wilson was certainly a classic illustration.
And then there was I've heard at least recently about Benny Goodman. He won't play. I mean, his major jobs unless Israel is there. And when he does accept these jobs, I think Ahmed takes a slight vacation or something like that.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, he's as a matter of fact, Israel was the first one to win a bass award. I think in 36
in the matter of
something like a
polls,
Esquire, yes, and the Esquire Awards or something like that. The first ones.
Are there any other soloists you'd care to mention? Pepper, anybody that stands out to sum this up?
Well, Chu Berry is very interesting to listen to, although his style doesn't stand up today as well as some of the early players. He had quite a different approach to a tenor, which I think some of the younger players would find interesting to listen to.
Well, for the leading forces of today and yesterday, from the standpoint of Pepper Adams and Donald Byrd, our thanks. And for those of us who do the listening, I think it's about time for us to take a cue and listen to one of those soloists.